Hey there, welcome to another episode of Just Say It. I am Matt Patrick. I'm joined by, not with, Chase Davis. This is actually the first time we've been together in a while for the podcast.
I guess so, yeah. It's been a couple months.
Yeah. The summer is crazy, but we're back and hopefully pumping out a bunch of good episodes for you to enjoy. Today, we're going to do a pretty fun topic. We just got done with the Burn the Ships conference when we're recording this. So this is the Tuesday after Burn the Ships. If you don't know what that is, we talked about it in every episode leading up to this basically, but that was our men's conference. We had a great time. It was really fun. I had a blast. I know, Chase, your favorite was the concert.
The concert was great, yeah. That guy did awesome. Jordan Robert Kirk. Go check out his music on Spotify. Great guy. We had a lot of fun. We had Doug Ponder from Grimke Seminary out here with us, and Michael Foster couldn't come, which was a bummer, but we did have Michael Clary, another Michael, for Christ the King in Cincinnati, Ohio. And kind of one of the overarching themes, if you kind of had to look at the whole entire conference this year, was this idea of agency and power and authority. And so we thought it would be good to kind of riff off that a little bit and try to make that a little bit practical for people, and even for the ladies who maybe, actually I know weren't there, but just in case that matters for them too. And so we thought we would kind of talk about agency. So Chase, where do you think we should start when we're talking about this kind of thing for people when we're trying to make it practical for them? Well, yeah, I think it's helpful to start with the Bible and understanding that when we read about Christ and his mission on the church or in the world to redeem the church, to redeem all things to himself, many people twist the scriptures today to create a version of spirituality in which we're essentially doormats. We're meant to be walked all over. They take the parts like the Sermon on the Mount, the first shall be last, and the teachings of Jesus about serving one another, and they both totalize it, meaning they apply it inappropriately to areas of life in ways that Jesus did not intend. Mm-hmm. And then they twist it to make it like peak spirituality, peak Christian living is to have no agency, to kind of be a loser in life, to have no power or influence, and to be persecuted relentlessly and be walked all over. And instead, what Michael Clary and his talk, and we'll see if those talks see the light of day. Do you think we'll publish them? I'm going to ask the speakers, but do you think we'll publish them?
No.
Okay. They were pretty spicy, pretty fun. And so what we were trying to advocate for was a more appropriate engagement with the topics of power, influence, agency, and authority. When we're talking about agency specifically, we're talking about the ability to do things.
Yeah.
So your ability to change things using your will that God has given you, the ability to choose a different direction for your life, to make a choice, whether it's something as small as waking up at a different time or as big as choosing a vocation or a spouse, but you making a choice. And I think it was Michael Clary who talked about a lot of times this gets confusing with the theological topic of justification and how we're saved, and how our salvation is very much we're elected by God, we're chosen by God for salvation. As Christians, we understand that biblically there's predestination, and that's not a different topic for another day. It's fairly relevant for this discussion because we take that understanding of salvation, and the conclusion wrongly that we draw is that we have there's nothing about us that we can exercise, that we don't have will, we don't have agency. And you'll hear kind of tropey Christian sayings like, nothing I've done is me, it's all God. And I try not to throw cold water on that. I want Christians to glorify God in all things.
Yeah, be humble. That's a good thing.
Yeah, we
right?
want, and athletes, you'll hear them give all credit to God. This is very good. So not trying to squash that. But there's a bit of a misconception and a bit of confusion in evangelicalism, and I'm putting that lightly. It's a great deal of confusion because we take that doctrine of salvation, soteriology, particularly justification, and then we don't know what to do with Paul's exhortations to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, to obey. and we don't know how to understand agency and will, and to depend on God's grace and mercy in improving our lives and becoming more holy and righteous and exerting ourselves in our authority in the world. So that's kind of the big theme that I heard from multiple speakers at the conference. But I think it's an important theme for us to address on this, because I think more Christians need to talk about it. Yeah, for sure. It's funny, being a pastor, it's something we see in pastoral circles all the time, right? It's the common thing of, you preach a sermon and somebody comes up to the pastor and goes, "Pastor, that was great. I really enjoyed that. I've never heard that taught that way," or whatever they say. They're trying to encourage the pastor, and pastors will say, "Oh, thanks, brother, but that wasn't me. That was all God." And I used to do that. Sure. So I understand that, but that's that seeping into those kinds of things. Now I jokingly, when people, if somebody comes up and goes, "Oh man, brother, that was a great sermon, but that was all God," and they say that to me, because people say that to you as well, I go, "Yeah, thanks, I appreciate that, but no, it wasn't, because if it was all God, it would have been a lot better." Sure. We had something to do with it in there, but you can just see that, Christians don't know how to actually, a danger I see in this is Christians don't know how to receive a compliment a lot of times, and they don't know how to accept being good at something. Right. Or they actually think that if they're good at something and they worked hard at it, that it's somehow bad. Yeah, it diminishes God's glory. Yeah, and God would be glorified in that. The example that I think of all the time is our children. It's I'm watching my kids play sports right now. I played sports, but watching your kids play sports, I get more nervous and have more joy and fun when they succeed than I ever did when I played a sport. It's more fun to see them succeed and do well than it ever was for myself to succeed or do well. And it's not a direct parallel, I understand that, but I think that God probably views us that way. It's man, that's awesome. I love it when those that are mine are out there doing great things and succeeding and doing it by the power of the Spirit of God, yes, and are being humble in doing it and all those things. But he enjoys people doing great things. Yes, he does. And I think it gets into issues in our day, and Doug highlighted this in his talk of anthropology and how we're to understand our embodied existence. We have a body. It should be put to good use for the Lord. It should be used for righteousness, and we should abound in good works. And so we don't understand our own biology, our own anthropology. We oftentimes in Christian circles diminish the relevance of the body. And of course, in this life, we have many trials and tribulations with our bodies through diseases, suffering, whatever it may be. And instead of appropriately discerning how we are to understand biblically and theologically how the weaknesses we encounter, we typically just don't talk about them, or we talk about our spiritual journey to the heavenly city as if it's some kind of escape pod on a spacecraft that we're just waiting to get read. Now, there are biblical passages from Paul in Romans and elsewhere that do talk about how it's better for me to live as Christ and to die as gain, how it will be better when we're with the Father, when we do funerals or anything like that. If that person is Christian, we're talking about how they're before the face of the Father and they're in eternal bliss in that state. And so there are weaknesses we encounter, there's sadness in our life. But unfortunately, we don't appropriately hold those things. We don't understand biological realities. So the pertinent example for our culture would be when we talk about mental health and emotional health and health. And we talk about trauma and we use these words. We oftentimes, as Christians, don't view those as topics that pertain to Christianity. Mm-hmm. We just assume, well, you're depressed. If you're clinically depressed, that's a psychological thing that mainly has to do with material matters, and therefore Christianity may offer comfort. You can memorize some Bible verses, but you're probably going to take medicine. You're probably going to depend on something for the rest of your life to cope with that reality. Mm-hmm. When instead, what I think we kind of advocated at the conference, we didn't touch on that at the conference, but kind of what we're trying to get at is there's biological ways that you can improve your body that will affect your ability to glorify God in your life, whether it's temperamentally, emotionally, work, whatever it may be, your ability to parent, your ability to serve others. There are biological realities at play that we cannot just either give ourselves over to kind of worldly solutions, and we also shouldn't downplay them as if they're not real.
Yeah.
As if, well, we should just ignore those problems. These are real issues that people face in life, Christian, non-Christian alike. It's common to all men that we all have bodies, and we need to know what to do with them.
Yeah, and I think Christians don't realize oftentimes probably how much Greek thought has worked its way in, and kind of separating the spiritual realm from the physical realm, and how anything that's physical now is probably bad, and that all we want to be is like spiritual, like how that's worked its way. I mean, it's even in the famous song, like, "I'll Fly Away," right? Like that,
Yep.
that hymn is basically doing that,
Sure.
know? And so a lot of Christians, they don't think about physicality and their bodies when they start thinking about agency and all of these things. And so you can kind of immediately start seeing where those dots start to connect, right? If you don't have agency as a Christian and you've been infiltrated with like Greek thought that your physicality doesn't matter, that someday in a resurrected body, which the Bible does say will be great.
We will have bodies in heaven eternally, yes.
Yes, and so we will have bodies in heaven eternally. But there is a responsibility now as Christians with our agency to take care of the bodies that we have been given. That's very clear in Scripture as well, right? Paul talks about that, and it's something that gets ignored. I mean, I would love to see the stats. It'd be fascinating to see how many sermons have ever been preached on physical fitness in the church.
Right.
And I know why. Like, even just saying that on this podcast, I immediately go, that touches on something where it's like, are you calling me fat?
Sure.
Or are you like saying like I need to do better? Or are you like, and it's kind of like one of those things like taking care of yourselves is a big part of Christianity. And we're not just talking about like bench pressing or something like that. Well, I think everybody should be under a barbell lifting. I think that that's a good thing. We're talking about diet. We're talking about all of these things are part of the Christian life. And it's our responsibility we have to at least under what we can control. We can't control everything. Sickness comes, death comes for us all, right? Like that's going to happen. Injuries happen. Some people tear their bicep doing baptism.
Some people do that. That's happened
like
before.
that happens. And, maybe you just weren't curling enough, Chase.
Maybe.
and more curls for Baptist pastors. Yeah. That's going to be a new book we write. Mm-hmm. But it is a fascinating thing to think about. It's like, what are the effects that we're seeing in our world and amongst Christians when we don't have agency when it comes to taking care of ourselves, right? Like what are the problems that we're facing? And they're actually pretty prevalent in our society.
They're very prevalent. One that comes to mind, there's a big interest right now, and this is a funny interest to me because when I was in college and when I was younger, I was into like eating healthy, but also like I would still eat Wendy's and Whataburger and like bad food, because you're a young person.
Yeah,
and
you love yourself some Wendy's.
Yeah, dude. Cheeseburgers are great. Very American. But like what happened is basically if you would go to I would go to Austin, Texas, or I would go to now Boulder or wherever you went that was more like kind of liberal. They were very into like health. They were very into like running and fitness. And if you go to more like generally conservative places, less health, you might say.
Yeah.
You visit more Midwestern places or places in the South, there's going to be a less emphasis on health. So health itself became left coded. But what you're seeing right now is that health and fitness is actually, there's kind of a resurgence on the conservative spectrum with Robert F. Kennedy, with what is it, Maha?
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussions being had about, what we're consuming, whether it's everything talking about microplastics to the water supply,
seed oils.
Yeah. So
all that stuff.
People are having these discussions, and my conviction as a pastor is like, and I don't want to take a liberty here that I don't have as a pastor, but I do think like pastors have something to say on this biblically and theologically. I don't think these are outside the bounds of Christian thought and our own history. And so these things should concern us as Christians. It's a unique evangelistic opportunity, I think, not to make it all about evangelism, but I do think there's a unique evangelistic opportunity for Christians to speak into these matters from a biblical standpoint. Unfortunately, for most of us, we've been uneducated, and we've neglected. So like you mentioned a couple things, like how we think about flesh, the Greek word sarx. We typically think when we read the New Testament, we see the word flesh in English, that Paul or others are talking about flesh as an embodied existence is bad. And that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the system of the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? So that word flesh is talking about the corruption, the original sin that comes with the fall of man, not that embodied existence is bad, because that would go contrary to Genesis 1 and 2, where embodied existence was made by God. Yeah. And so it's not that all that's corrupt. And you mentioned kind of Greek thought, this Platonistic thought. So the difference is that in Christian thought, we have a body and a soul. Mm-hmm. These are both distinct and yet co-joined in a sense. Your soul can live apart from your body, but that's not the eternal destination of your soul. Your soul is meant to be in a body. So we have actually the body created first, Adam made from the dust of the ground, formed into a man. And then yet he doesn't become Adam until God breathes life into him, animating him, giving him agency, giving him a mission, giving him purpose. And so the soul and body are wed in unique ways. There's all sorts of theories out there, whether it's in academic literature or pop evangelical literature, about the implications of that and how they're wed together. Is one more important than the other? I think we can conclusively say, as Christians, that your soul is quote unquote more important than your body. Mm-hmm. I think that's fair to say. But even by saying that, what we're not trying to say is your body is therefore not important, or your body has no impact on your life. Why is suffering so difficult? Because suffering makes it difficult to trust the Lord. Suffering, sickness, illness, all this kind of stuff, ailments of all sorts, make it difficult on our ability to glorify God, to find joy in God. Also, they provide unique opportunities to find joy in God. Mm-hmm. And so our embodied existence is kind of integral to our Christian life. So we shouldn't neglect talking about these things.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, too. You brought up suffering. In this kind of evangelical world in which we live now, suffering is actually oftentimes considered like the highest level of Christian spirituality, yeah. Right? And so, but for some reason, we don't treat like getting sick that way.
Right.
It's fascinating to see like the logical conclusions when you draw them out for people. But, when I think about it, I think of, we have been given this responsibility as Christians to live in this life, to share the gospel with people, to live a righteous life, to be holy, because we've been made holy by Jesus Christ. And so the responsibility in there of not thinking about the physical implications of that has really dire ramifications for the church. And one of the things that we would argue at the Well, and we say this often, and we're not apologetic about this at all, is the idea that there is a distinction between men and women, and there's a physical reality that's there, and we live in a society, in a world that's trying to make the world much more androgynous and less distinct, yep. Right? And we're seeing that, and we could get into conspiracy theories and all that stuff. I don't think that's going to help us out that much here.
Sure,
but I would say that we're seeing men, particularly. Whether it's through the food ecosystem or BMI rates being at all-time highs in men, we're seeing things like testosterone levels fall dramatically. And in particularly, the one that's really concerning right now is how much it's falling off in adolescent young men, right? And things like that. And so we're seeing men, testosterone is put in the body by God, right? Things like that. There's other things too. I'm just using that because that's a big one. Mm-hmm. It's just falling off, and we have to be able to ask the questions like, one, why is this happening? And two, is it good? And,
right.
Is that a good thing?
Right.
And I would say no.
Right. And I think that's important. Like, there's all sorts of theories out there as to why. I remember in high school, it was funny. It was a little awkward moment, because I'm a teenager and I'm sitting there and we used to watch the news as a family, mm-hmm. and it's WFAA Channel 8 in Dallas. And it was laptops were just becoming a thing when I was in high school.
Oh, I know where you're going.
And the news anchor, I'm sitting there watching it with my mom, and the news anchor goes, studies are showing that if men put a laptop on their laps, that it decreases their sperm count. And I'm like a teenager, so I'm already awkward about this stuff, you know.
Yeah,
and I'm sitting there with my mom, and I had a laptop, and I moved it off my lap. Because I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do with that information. But there's a lot of stuff like that. Like, well, what is happening? I mean, we could point to the water supply. I mean, we didn't do our opening segment, but one of my tweets I sent recently was about how Trump needs to invest in American infrastructure. The most important thing he could do was filter in our water supply to remove SSRIs. Because what happens in even our water supply or tap water, if you're not on well water, is a lot of the pharmaceuticals that we consume are not filtered out with our current system. You would have to invest in like some kind of carbon filtration for water treatment plants in order to get these things, which means that you're getting trace forms of these pharmaceuticals in your tap water. And those pharmaceuticals affect things like your testosterone, your mental health, your outlook on life. And so, you know, it was kind of a silly thing, but I'm actually deadly serious. Like, I think this is a big deal. The same thing is true with abortifacients. I think they call it Plan B, where people are taking chemical abortion pills. A lot of that stuff can't be filtered out. That's terrifying. We're literally drinking judgment. And so that gets into fertility rates, all this stuff. But to go back to what you said, there's a biological difference between men and women. These things have real ramifications. God made us distinct, not the same, and that's good. That's a beautiful thing. We've always acknowledged this. I mean, women can get a little sensitive on this when you'll have the what's the classic scene from The Office where Dwight is like tracking all the women during their time of the month. Do you remember this? Yeah. And like they're all horrified that he did this, and he, being like borderline autistic, was like, I'm just trying to know how to relate to you better, because during different times of the month you become different, you know. And so
I don't think you can make that show anymore.
No, you definitely couldn't. But this is like common. Like married people know this. Yeah. Women know this intuitively. They don't like to talk about it. But men know this. Like we need to be, careful during certain seasons, and so these things need to be talked about more. Is my point. We need to, and that for husbands, that's comes down to living with your wife in an understanding way. Like, hey, how do I talk to my wife in an appropriate way and love her appropriately during whatever season of life, whether it's pregnancy, menopause, anything like that. And I don't think Christians really talk about that much. I don't know why. I don't think it's because we're prudish. I just think I guess it's uncomfortable for some people to talk about. Mm-hmm. But the same thing is true for men, that there are biological realities at play. And for men, it's just not talked about as much. And you talked about testosterone. That's a huge one for men. It really changes the way we approach life and exercise agency.
Yeah, and it matters. And what we're seeing, particularly in the West, is as we're seeing. If you look at the statistics, they're crazy. If you go back to a 60-year-old man today compared to a 60-year-old man 50 years ago, when you do a full blood panel, things like testosterone, they don't look remotely the same.
Interesting.
And it's completely different. And also what we're seeing now is guys are aware of this, and I think they don't like what that does, because they're going, man, I'm not operating like I feel like I should. So if you listen to sports talk radio at all, I feel like half the commercials are like for like the low T center, that kind of thing. It's like every other commercial is that, and you're sold like a million things on Instagram and everything like that. And I actually do know the stat, but men taking some form of testosterone, whether it's a microdose or a full TRT replacement therapy kind of thing, it's up 124%.
Jeez.
Over the last couple years.
Wow.
So guys everywhere are running to that.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating. And then I look at one of the gym that I go to. It's really fascinating to get in there, because I'm shocked with how many young people, men and women, are in there. I don't remember when I was that age, we didn't go and like squat and deadlift and bench press and do all of these things that's become so popular now. So there's a big resurgence actually happening in that world right now. And I have become convinced that I think people are looking around and they're going like, something's wrong here. And we don't want to be this way. And so people are either getting into supplementation or weightlifting or combining those things together to battle it. And I actually think that's good. Like, I think that's a good thing. But it is fascinating how, particularly on the left, there's tons of news articles that have come out that like, weightlifting is, a sign that you're a Nazi
sure.
or something like that.
Sure.
Like we're seeing more and more things like that. But when we think about it from a spiritual standpoint, I think we need to like just take it back a notch a little bit, right? And for people listening and going like, are we advocating for this or that? You're welcome to email me. I'll tell you what I think. But I think the first step is kind of going to where we started and going, you have a responsibility before God to take care of yourself. And when we don't, the ramifications on the body are real, and it actually works against God being able to use you in that agency, but it also takes agency to do something about it.
Yeah, so why don't we get into, like you mentioned, the difference between, like, I think you said a 60-year-old man, like, 50 years ago or something?
Yeah.
What are the ramifications? Let's talk specifically about men to tease this out.
Okay.
What are the ramifications for a man when he does have low testosterone? What is his life like? What is his personality like? How does he operate in the world?
Yeah, the biggest thing that you're going to see is you're going to have less muscle, right? And so that's just a really simple, an obvious thing. But what that does is as you get older and, like things like bone density and the ability to be able to do basic things like walk, stand up, these sorts of things. When a man has less testosterone, he has less of an ability to quite literally just do basic things the older he gets, right?
Sure.
And the biggest indicator of low testosterone in men is BMI.
Okay.
So body mass index. So what we're seeing is men tend to be more overweight. They're having less testosterone. So you combine those things together, and we're not doctors here, right? We're pastors.
Right.
We enjoy nerding out on this stuff a little bit, but I don't think you have to be a doctor to go, you're overweight, your testosterone levels are lowering, you have less muscle, you're getting older, bone density naturally decreases, things like that. Things like NAD levels decrease, which is part of your mitochondrial function, things like that. That's all decreasing as you get older. And so in a way, you might be able to prop yourself up and live longer because of modern medicine and drugs, but it really gets down to what's the quality of life that you're having. The way I talk to guys when they say like, I'm not the most fit person in the world. If you're watching, you can see I'm not like some giant meathead guy or anything like that, though I might like to be. But the reality for me came, I remember I was at an amusement park, and it was a really sad moment. I'm really not making fun of this man. I don't know this man, but I was at an amusement park with my kids, and there was a ride, and this dad wanted to get on this roller coaster with his son, and he couldn't get on the roller coaster because he was too big. Mm. And so him and his son had to walk away. And I know it's silly, but I was like really sad to watch. And then just thinking about my kids and the sports that they play, like I want to be able to do things with my children.
Right.
Right. And so there's actual, I think, family implications here of like, what can we do together?
Sure.
Right. Like there's things where if mom or dad's sick all the time, it's hard for them to work.
Yeah.
To hold a job. It's hard for them to participate in their kid's life, right? The sickness increases dramatically with obesity being as rampant as it is in our country. And it just turns into this big kind of pharma-like cycle of like, well, let's just give more and more medications to people instead of maybe taking some agency here and going like, hey, maybe it would be good for me to go for a walk. Like that's what I'm kind of advocating for people on starting is like learning to like start taking care of themselves to do these things because it does have a big impact and it affects everything. If you look at our healthcare system in the United States, the reason it's so expensive is because people are sick. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things going on and we've got to pay for that, right? And we can, I won't get into like how price gouging and all that
Sure.
stuff goes on, but it's a really sad state of affairs. And I would just point to, I'd say, I think the enemy absolutely loves to see the people of God sick.
Yeah. Yeah, and needlessly, I think it's self-induced. But you talked about the physical experience, being able to like pick up your grandkids or play with your sons and daughters or whatever. What about or load the car for a road trip? What about the personality Like what happens to a man who's experiencing this, who's overweight, and low T? What is the personality of that kind of man?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite frankly, it's probably less masculine.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, and I think a lot of what the world has taught us around masculinity, I actually used it in my talk for Burn the Ships, is I think it was I could be wrong, but it's the American Therapeutic Journal or something, or Psychological Journal, has now officially labeled traditional masculinity as a bad thing.
Sure.
Right? So I understand some people are going to hear me say that and be like, this is good.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, no, that's not. Because men are designed to be protectors, to have aggression. Aggression is a good thing. That's a natural thing, outworking of testosterone. But we live in a world that we've been told that aggression is a negative thing. No, you can be aggressive in the right way.
Right.
Like a well-formed man knows how to use their power, their aggression, towards accomplishing great things. But the problem is when we see these impacts physiologically on men happening and they lose those things, they're less inclined to go out and start a business, to
pursue a woman.
Yeah, to marry a woman, to have children and do the hard work of raising children, right? These are all the outworkings of that. And then they tend to really not have other male-on-male friendships, right? Like, because guys that are operating normally like to be with each other, that they can handle kind of some ribbing and things like that. And so we see male friendship go down because it's just all of a sudden you become more complacent. And so it's easier to just kind of, like I said in my talk, to shrink into the shadows of your man cave alone.
Sure.
And so I think you look at the kind of trickle-down effect of this as one of the reasons that men are lonely is because they're not functioning as they should from a physiological level. Now, there's obviously other things at work in that, but I think that that's a big one. And men they're just not as aggressive as they need to be, and they don't have that natural strength that should be there, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things, I mean, you mentioned aggression, I would say assertiveness, willingness to kind of assert yourself, meaning represent an opinion that you hold, and not, wilt or overstate it in such a way that you are overcompensating in order to prove yourself. So it touches on an area that I find of relevance for Christianity. There's a lot of talk, and there has been, I don't know how relevant it is for youth today, but I still think it is, about the word insecurity.
Yeah.
And I think that this kind of low T, the biological realities that a lot of men face produce insecurity that could actually be improved just by lifting weights, eating healthy. And unfortunately, the Christian community, what you'll often hear, instead of addressing these matters, they talk about how, you need to find your identity in Christ. And, you want to, it's not so much about self-esteem. We want to glorify God. And if you're satisfied in God, then that will diminish your insecurity. And some of that is true. At the same time, some of it is very biological, such that you're doing this to yourself. Whether it's you're eating really bad food, or you're overweight, or you're not active at all. And I feel a great deal of sympathy for a lot of people today who are, like we've talked about with BMI and obesity, because the world we live in, where we're sitting on screens and typing in data in a chair all day, and that's considered work.
Yeah.
And it's inactive. It's not physical. It really does produce. So it feels like there's forces aligned to create this environment where we do become lazy and fat. And I feel sympathy for that, because I'm not saying it's not difficult to do. And you talked about going to the gym. It's like in a different type of world. Men would be on the fields doing things, and they would be with their family. Their wives would be with them until they had kids, and then the kids would come along and work, and there would be production done that way. There would be activity where you walked to church. You didn't have a car and now you have self-driving cars that usher you. You don't even have to use your hands. So I do feel a great deal of sympathy, but we're saying that, look, if you are experiencing your life with insecurity. You're not willing to assert yourself. When you do, you're still deeply insecure. It's very scary for you to engage with other men. You're easily intimidated. You're not meek, like the Bible talks about, meaning power under control. You're meek as in the sense of, and it's not even meekness, just kind of sheepish. And not like sheep, like God wants us to be a sheep in his flock, but sheepish is in like kind of cowardly, that kind of thing. That's not noble. That's not what Christ calls us to. My problem is that too much modern evangelicalism teaches us that those things are good, that men should be this way. And I'm like, no, like that's not, Christ is trying to say, like, let's use aggression like you talked about. Testosterone increases aggressiveness in men. What Christ is telling us when he's calling us to be meek and be humble and all of this is he's telling us to come under his yoke and use that for his glory. Yeah. He's not telling us that that's inherently wrong or God's design for your body was wrong. And so we want confident men, not confidence necessarily that's inappropriate, like we talked about at the beginning of the show. Yeah. We want a healthy confidence in the Lord and their own capacities to know where they can exercise agency. And that will involve risk-taking. We don't want people to be foolish, but we want them to be able to take risk, appropriate risk. And that will be temperamentally determined too, based on your family, based on all that. But we want to help men understand, and all Christians understand, that a lot of times these insecurities, the sadness you may feel, the lethargy, the melancholy, can be easily improved. Yes, the Lord needs to meet you in that. And also you need to take ownership and responsibility of your own life to make changes, whether it's getting up earlier. Some people have suggested, that's the crazy thing about with the internet.
So much.
There's so much, people talk about staring to the sun or like getting sunlight. And that's true. You have seasonal, whatever they call it, SADS, seasonal affective disorder, depression. And people in Seattle will have like these lights in their room when it's dark in order to affect their mood. Yeah. And so what we're talking about is very, I think, pertinent to the life of a Christian because we cannot just slather on a mismatch of Bible verses and then misinterpret those Bible verses in order to justify what I see is this strange world we live in that seems to have aligned and conspired to diminish the confidence, courage, the ability to assert, and labeled masculinity as problematic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you think about it too, because I think people, when they hear this stuff, especially if they're not like in like health conscious mode, it seems like a lot. Mm-hmm. And it is, and it can be, but it's weird. I would encourage people to think of it from a spiritual dimension, like how so many things are trying to be stacked against you to make you an unhealthy person. I would say like down to like the very simple thing of sleeping. Right. Our screens on our phones and things like that are like, we have scientific proof to show like using a screen within like 30 minutes to an hour before bedtime harms your sleep. So if you're not sleeping well, that's a huge indicator for not being healthy, right? Like like getting good sleep is really important. But like all of these things are like pressing on around us, and we have to go. The enemy would love nothing more than, like I've already said, than to have a really unhealthy people group, right? Like that would be great, particularly men that can't do things and lead as they're supposed to be. Take them out of the equation, and all of a sudden you've got something to work with if you're the enemy there. And this stuff all applies to women too. This isn't just men. Like them taking care of themselves and all of these sorts of things is actually a deeply spiritual thing that should be paid a lot more close attention to than I think it is. And here's the rub, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about this, Chase. Is people are going to hear this and they're going to go, oh, Matt and Chase are asking for everybody, like they need to have like a 6-pack or like be like super jacked or like be able to run like an ultra marathon or something like that. And my temptation there is to go, no, that's not what I'm saying. Sure. But actually, if I was just hanging out with my friends, I'd be like, yeah, sure, why not? Right. Like what we've actually said, like the beauty of the human body is like we're attracted to beautiful things. Right. right? And I'm not saying that other people aren't beautiful, you know, like that kind of thing, but I'm just saying like it feels good to be fit.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Right? Like that's a good thing. And so we're even tempted to like kind of explain it away and just go, no, just like be a little bit healthy. I'm like, no, like the funny thing about when they start getting healthy, they become kind of obsessed with it, which then people can go, it's an idol and all that kind of stuff. But there is like a road that you go on like, oh, wow, because feeling good is a good thing.
Right.
And you want more of that.
Right. Yeah. And that ultimately will not save your soul.
No.
That ultimately will not reconcile you to God, but it will affect your ability to even receive the commands from Scripture and obey God in your body and master your body. As you begin to master your body, whether it's through sport, exercise, whatever, you're able to then use your body for good things, for godly purposes, and you're able to control your emotions by the power of the Spirit, your passions. You're able to subject them to what God would have for you rather than being controlled by your emotions. But yeah, you're right. I think we could have a whole nother podcast on the importance of aesthetics. You know, Christians from our Western tradition talk about truth, beauty, and goodness, and we rarely talk about beauty. It's almost laughable how little we talk about it because we're afraid of offending people or whatever it may be. And actually, I don't think a six-pack is something to aspire to necessarily. I think strength, just general strength.
Yeah.
Like I would rather see a bunch of men with broad shoulders. That's one of the funny things that I've reflected upon. Like men can literally, like, you can just change your appearance, your body.
Yeah.
When I look back on myself when I was in my young 20s, I was kind of a gazelle. I was like 160.
I was never a gazelle.
You were not. You were built to be a linebacker. And then once I started working out, that changed how I led my home, how I interacted with my wife, how I interacted with people at the church, how I made friends. And you can just broaden your shoulders by, doing overhead press and, other types of exercises. And that does have an impact on other people. And there's so much we could talk about, but like that gets into another thing. Like, there's an appropriate level of having a presence about you as a man. Let's talk about men, but even women, particularly men, where you do want to have a sense of good posture, form, and present. Spurgeon talked about this. He wants barrel-chested preachers.
Yeah, he said guys who have big chests shouldn't be preachers.
Yeah,
and I love that guys love to quote that stuff. And I look at him like, if you read everything Spurgeon said, you'd be really upset.
You would be so offended. And so you can go do push-ups. You don't have to, necessarily go to the gym. So I'm less concerned with the manifestations of beauty, as it is like beauty, like the Bible talks about, comes from the heart. And what it does when you have physical fitness is it's not about, you can, if you want to go for a six-pack, go for it, have fun. You want to have biceps, go for it, have fun. What I'm talking about is a presence that is reflective of who God made you to be. And yeah, some beauty is culturally derived in different cultures. People think things are beautiful, I guess, differently. But I do think there's a standard of beauty because God is beautiful. God is all beautiful. It's easy with truth. We like to separate truth from lies. We're big justice people. With goodness, we have a general sense of what is good and what is bad. But with beauty, we're often very much squeamish because we're like, wait, are you saying something's ugly? And it's like, yeah, I am saying something's ugly.
Yeah.
And we have good disagreements on this, actually.
Yeah.
That's not wrong to have disagreements on this, but we should always go back to God's word about what he describes beauty as. And so what you're going to find is among Christian people who are healthy, who love God, there's going to be a pleasantness about them. And I'm not talking about pleasantness in some kind of, weakness. I'm talking about a pleasantness, about a confidence that they carry themselves with a settledness about their own sense of self, purpose, who they are in Christ, and also what they do in the world. There's not a sense of either overcompensation where I've got to prove myself, but there's also not a sense of undercompensation, a self-diminishment that's inappropriate. And so there's a sense of beauty that comes from the inward self, but also we can affect that by our health. We will feel better in life. We will be able to appreciate God's beauty in the world as we ourselves are healthy.
Yeah. And just to kind of put a cap on the kind of aesthetic component is, as a church right now, we're in the book of 1 Samuel. And when Saul is called, it goes through his physical aesthetics. David, we see his physical aesthetics talked about. So God talks about this stuff in his word and talks about it in the positive.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so I would just encourage people to wrestle with that a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, it says Saul was really tall. There's nothing, I'm I'm not going to get taller. Like
apparently you can. You can go to Turkey. No, you can go to Turkey, and people are doing this now. I don't think this is good.
No, that's not good.
They will do modification on their legs. It takes a year to recover at least. And it's not a guarantee that it'll work where they can increase their height. I don't think this is good.
No.
But, yeah. Anyways.
But point being, like, there's things you can't control.
Yes.
Right? Like height. But the Bible does talk about these men and gives their physical characteristics in the positive.
Yes.
Right? And so.
Yeah. And an important thing in that David passage, it says, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. It connects to Christ because with Christ, there's an indication that there was nothing about Christ where he was like some what you would see in Greek mythology or Roman mythology, where it's like as if he was like somebody that all men would look at and be like, that's a man that we should worship.
Yeah.
So there was something about him that was normal, so to speak. Yeah. But that gets at what God's word says about David, that man looks at the outward appearance. It's because the reason there was no outward form to Christ where other men would worship his outward form was because God was trying to draw people's souls to himself through Christ.
Yep.
And it wasn't, I'm sure Jesus was strong. He came from a construction background. He was able to lift things, but it had more.
Walked great distances all the time.
Yeah. So the point is not that we can't look at outward appearances, or that we can't notice outward appearances. We can't understand the differences between men and women. It's that we're going to have a natural disposition to see, to apprehend, to discern. That's all fine. That's very human. But ultimately, we trust that God sees the heart. So if we see somebody that the world may not say is beautiful, or that has some kind of birth defect, or whatever it may be, as Christians, we don't go, well, you're less than me. We go as Christians like, you can be saved. We can delight in you. You can have a confidence even in your weaknesses. We can boast in the power of Christ. That's what Paul talks about. So I think these things are deeply connected to Christian spirituality. It makes me sad that more Christians don't think that way.
Maybe to put a cap on this whole talk is bring it all the way back to the beginning. And so somebody listening to this, we started talking about agency.
Yep.
And the truth is that, like, a lot of times, if somebody's hearing this, they might feel a little offended, or, man, I don't know if I like that. I would say if you feel like that, check that, go to God on that and see if that's maybe conviction that's coming through on that, to maybe take some agency to start doing some things to make your lifestyle a little bit more healthy. And it doesn't mean you have to do everything right away, but I would just say, like, it's going to take you doing something, right? Like, I remember meeting with a young man a while ago, and he was telling me about how he wanted to, date this girl and wanted to get married and all this stuff. And I asked him, well, what are you doing about it? And he's like, I'm just praying. And I was like, man, like, if we think of this as like, you're really hungry, but God stocked the fridge. He's not going to make the same. He's like, go make the sandwich.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, you got to get up and you got to go. You've got to enter the dating world. You've got to go to church and find a woman there and be like, would you like to go out with me? Like,
sure.
You're going to have to do something. And so I'd say the same thing applies towards physical fitness. All of this sort of stuff is going like, you need to do something. It's not just going to be like you just going like, man, I really wish I was living a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like it takes agency and actually going like, hey, God wants this for me. This is a good thing. I'm going to pursue this with the Lord.
Yeah. And just think of, we have several church members who struggle with insomnia, and their ability to come to church and worship the living God on Sundays is hindered by that struggle. That's a real struggle.
Yeah.
But if you were to choose insomnia, if Saturday nights were just you're staying up late, drinking to excess, which of course is unchristian, and doing all sorts of things, or even just staying up late till 3 a.m., your ability to, your agency to decide to come to church that day, to obey the Lord and come to church, is going to be hindered by that. And so that's just a simple application. So if anybody's squeamish on this talk about agency or asserting yourself or, exerting your power, all that kind of stuff, it really doesn't need to be more than just like you have the ability to make a difference in your life. This is why Jordan Peterson is so widely popular. He's trying to encourage people in a wildly kind of victim mindset culture to take responsibility, to stop being a victim. There are things that have impacted you. What can you do about it today? And I don't think that's unchristian. In fact, I think it's deeply connected to Christianity. Unfortunately, Jordan hasn't made that connection. It doesn't seem yet. It would be great if he did. But yeah, everyone exerts agency in some way. Even your agency to disagree with the topic of agency is agency. And so it's a matter of how we use agency, and can our agency be redeemed and used for God's glory? Absolutely, we think. We are proposing, we believe that's deeply biblical.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good.
Yeah, fun time.
Yeah. You want to close this out?
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. I don't know, let's see, what do we need to talk about coming up? Because I don't, when you're listening, we'll determine, what's going on with the life of our church. We have a lot of things coming up. You can go to boulderwell.org to keep up with our latest events. If you've been blessed by this podcast, we'd love your support. Go to boulderwell.org/give. If you have any questions, just email us at info@boulderwell.org, and we will see you next time.